hand over to Rebecca.
Okay, thanks, Colin. So I've got some slides, and I'm going to start that in a minute. Just to go over the book to start with. The Dewy Morn was published in 1884, and it follows the developing relationship between Felice Goring and farmer Marshall Barnard. The two characters navigate their way to one another through the uncertainties of their social positions and very different emotional territories, all set in the rural Marlborough Downs. I'm just going to share my screen if I can. Get my slides up. Are the slides visible yet, Colin?
Yes, we can see the first slide. Can you just
Okay.
are you going to do us just click on slideshow or?
Yes, I've got a black bar obscuring it at the top of the screen.
All right, I can't see that. Can't see
No,
that
it's
here.
just my presenter bar. But it's moved now. So,
Yeah.
okay. So the Dewy Morn was not typical of its time, and coming the year after Jefferies' spiritual autobiography, The Story of My Heart, the hallmarks of that work, which was a breakthrough for Jefferies, are very much present in the novel. And the opening passages, for example, detailing Felice's ascent of Ashpen Hill, are similar to those in The Story of My Heart when Jefferies climbs Liddington Hill. And we can see here the both quotations are describing the ascent on a warm summer morning. And they both pinpoint the moment of placing the foot on the turf of the hill as special, as if crossing a threshold. And on climbing the hill, both passages refer to the invigorating quality of the hill air and the sense of forgetting. So we can be fairly sure that Jefferies was drawing on his own experience here. The Dewy Morn is, I would say, one of Jefferies' most hopeful works. He was in many ways at his peak. He had found his feet as a novelist in Greenfern Farm, secured his reputation as a social commentator, being described as an agricultural expert in one paper, and found financial success. As we might expect, the Dewy Morn offers commentaries on social questions, including the enfranchisement of the agricultural labourer and the relation between tenant and landlord. Agricultural labourers in Wiltshire effectively gained the right to vote in national parliamentary elections through the representation of the resistance from farmers and landowners. As Marshall says to Felice, the labourers, your old cottager, for instance, are going to have votes, and in future, the country, I mean the rural districts, will be in their hands. The farmers, as a governing class, will disappear. And here, I'm just going to show you this table, which I've constructed. It shows the number of occurrences of terms relating to the land management in Jefferies' countryside writings and his fiction, and I've organised them in date order. Now, these terms are most often found in his works concerning the rural population and the land. And you can see here that the Dewy Morn scores the highest for the terms amongst the fiction titles, aligning it with Hodge and his masters, the highest scoring in the countryside works. which was Jefferies' key publication about agriculture and the land, serialized in the Standard newspaper in 1879. So the Dewy Morn was very much a product of Jefferies' rural interests in the late 1870s, but it also embraces the spiritual ideas of his later work too, which I'll talk more about in a minute. Many reviews of the Dewy Morn concluded that the book failed as a novel, with the plot being considered its main weakness. Now, a review here in the Athenaeum for 1884 said, Mr. Jefferies is not a novelist at all. He can observe and he can record his observations, but the faculty of creation is not in him. Nothing lives in the book save the author himself, and his existence is terribly to the prejudice of his personages. He gives us everything but fiction, dawns and sunsets, a rhapsody on the female knee, theories of acting, theories of sculpture, larks and blackbirds, Shakespeare, politics, summer in the country, analysis and description, description and analysis, till one revolts and wearies as of a diet of chopped straw. However, the novel did find more favourable receptions, particularly as time went on, and the idea of what a novel should or shouldn't be naturally evolved. Writing 50 years later, Queenie Leavis, wife of Frank Raymond Leavis, the prominent 20th century English language critic, recognised the innovation of the Dewy Morn and placed it alongside Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte and Sons and Lovers by D.H. Lawrence. And she wrote, in the Dewy Morn, he goes further than any Victorian novelist towards the modern novel. I mean the novel that seems to have significance for us, other than as a mirror of manner and morals. I should describe it as one of the few real novels between Wuthering Heights and Sons and Lovers. By a modern novel, Queenie meant that Jefferies' focus on the sensory experience of the countryside and characters' inner lives over a complex plot, and his exploration of themes of nature and growth aligned the novel with those of the modernist era of the early 20th century. At the time, some were simply indifferent to the Dewy Morn, with the Academy noting only that all the charm which usually distinguishes Mr. Jefferies' transcripts from nature will be found in the Dewy Morn. But aside from Jefferies' powerful descriptions of nature, what else can we learn from the Dewy Morn? What does it tell us about Jefferies himself? Even a scathing reviewer in the Sheffield Independent admitted, it is true that where Jefferies himself, or someone who is intimately known to him, is the original, the character sketches are excellent. Jefferies found it difficult to distance himself from the characters he created. When he attempted to create characters with which he shared very little real-world experience, as we see in the early novels, the result was ultimately unconvincing. Greenfern Farm was a turning point in his fiction in 1878, because this is when he began to draw more deeply on autobiographical material. This vein continued over the next few years in Wood Magic and Bevis. In Felice, in the Dewy Morn, we see Jefferies' first autobiographical female character, though elements of Jefferies himself are also present in Marshall Barnard. And now I'm just going to outline where I think Jefferies was coming from with this novel, as I don't think we can really understand the book unless we understand Jefferies' motivations for writing it. Early in the narrative, he draws attention to women's questions and the lack of autonomy and agency given to women of the time. He writes of Felice, she realised for the first time in her life the powerlessness of women. They cannot stir, they cannot move in the matters that concern them most dearly. They are helpless at the mercy of the petty events called circumstance. This was very much a continuation of the themes of his articles of the 1870s, which addressed a broad spectrum of social and political issues, including the lives of women in a patriarchal society. The social condition of women was clearly on his mind at this time, and is echoed by the theme of the field play, published in Time magazine in December 1883, which follows the decline of the abused field labourer Dolly. Felice, Jefferies writes in the Dewy Morn, would force circumstances to her will and mould her fate in her hands. In Felice, we have a character deeply attuned to the natural world. By accentuating her physical fitness, strength, and engagement with nature, Jefferies is making an example to put before his reading public. What could strike more of a contrast with a London-based audience, which he had already successfully cultivated through his natural history writing for the London periodicals, and a wider Victorian society increasingly disconnected from the natural world. In the novel, he laments that no one seems to care about poetry now. No one cares for anything outside cities. The rural population in England had begun to decline significantly after 1861, just as Jefferies was entering adolescence, and we can imagine how he might have felt this loss quite acutely. The migration from the countryside to the cities was a major demographic trend following decades of industrialization, with over 70% of the population living in urban areas by the end of the 1880s. Something that strikes me anew every time I reread Jefferies is how ahead of his time he really was, and how some of his ideas are more relevant now than ever before. The rural to urban transition brought new anxieties and questions about the future. In the Dewy Morn, Jefferies expresses his own concern that children who grow up in cities are missing out on an essential ingredient in their development. And he writes, "All of you with little children, take them somehow into the country, among green grass and yellow wheat, among trees, by hills and streams. If you wish their highest education, that of the heart and the soul, to be completed, they will forget their books. They will never forget the grassy fields. If you wish your children to think deep things, to know the holiest emotions, take them to the woods and hills and give them the freedom of the meadows." We only have to look at growing social movements such as Montessori, Forest School, and the recent campaign for a natural history GCSE qualification in English schools to see that Jefferies was correct in his prediction that the growing rift between children and nature would have consequences. As Jefferies had already expressed in his articles of the 1870s, a loss of exposure to the countryside risked a loss of imagination and feeling. And as he writes again in the Dewy Morn, "The world has long since decided that the imaginative is to be avoided. Have nothing to do with books, pictures, sculpture, with thought or dream. Above all things, be practical." And he very much rebelled against this idea, and it was an objective of the Dewy Morn to present an alternative way of thinking and feeling, one that was focused on natural beauty and rooted in the rhythms of the natural world. As in the story of my heart, Jefferies references his own struggle to maintain his vision, made fragile by an increasingly secular and economically driven society. The commonplace crushes the ideal as a cannonball might a statue. In the novel, Jefferies suggests that the life of the senses offers freedom and a deeper form of human experience. In the bathing scene, Marshall freed his soul from the grossness of material existence towards a higher truth. Here, Marshall expresses deep reverence of Felice, a startlingly modern attitude when placed in the context of how women were treated in Jefferies' time, yet one which recalled the philosophy of ancient Greece. By 1884, Jefferies had spent much time in the London art galleries and had visited the Louvre in Paris. There he saw the statue, the Crouching Venus, a model of Venus surprised at her bath, which originated in ancient Greece and was copied by the Romans. The statue Jefferies saw was a Roman marble copy from the 2nd century CE, and his meditations on the statue became the subject of the essay Nature in the Louvre, published in the Magazine of Art, 1887. And it is this statue he is most likely recalling in the scene where Felice sits by the bathing pool. And we can see the similarities between these passages taken from the essay and from the bathing scene, where both celebrate a moment of the intangible becoming tangible. A certain alignment or surprising symmetry is present, something we might experience when we find something beautiful. Of the statue, Jefferies writes, there in full existence, visible, tangible, seems to be all that the heart has imagined of the deepest and highest emotions. The beautiful made tangible in human form. And in the Dewy Morn, writing of Marshall, he writes, till this instant, he had never met anything that answered to the poetry, the romance in his heart. Full as he was of the deepest admiration of beauty, till this moment he had never seen it. And he writes that Felice knew her own fullness of existence. Like this, the maidens of ancient Greece sang to the stream when they filled their urns. Lastly, there is a message in the Dewy Morn so pertinent to contemporary practices of well-being and mindfulness, which is to keep an open and generous heart and mind. And as Jefferies says, let us not outlive love in our days. He writes there is no reward or profit in the ships, the mines, the warehouses, and infers that if there was more love and honesty in the world would be a better place. And so that's where I'm going to end my introduction. And next we're going to open up the discussion. So Colin, back over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rebecca. It was very interesting. Does anyone have an immediate comment they'd like to make, or a question for Rebecca or for the audience as a whole? If you want to put up your hand, then I can pick out who wants to do that. I've got one, in some ways, fairly trivial question, but it does intrigue me that it's the novel. It said it's set in Wiltshire, but then I read comments about the sea, and Marshall, he goes to throw, I can't remember what it was, something into the sea, and it talks about an estuary, a trout stream joining an estuary and then to the sea. Now, Wiltshire is close, but it's not on the coast. So, are we convinced it is set in Wiltshire, or is it a fairly imaginative depiction of the countryside?
I think what he was doing is something he did in The Story of My Heart, where he attempted to blend the two downland landscapes of Sussex and Wiltshire. So when he writes in The Story of My Heart his experiences on the Downs, he's talking often about the sea being just over there. I think we get the same coming through in the Dewy Morn. So he's blending the two
Right.
experiences of climbing the hills.
Right. Because
But
he
I
was
wonder
living.
if he'd also been to Exmoor as well, hadn't he? So I wonder if the trout stream might relate to
Yeah,
Exmoor,
yeah.
possibly.
Right. Because when he wrote it, he would, well, certainly when he wrote some of it, he was in Brighton, wasn't he? So I thought, well, is it the
Mm.
South Downs rather than then I looked on the back cover of our edition. It says the foothills of the Marlborough Downs, and I thought, oh, have I misunderstood something? Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Anybody else? And Andrew Rossby, do you want to comment? You'll need to unmute yourself, Andrew. And Andrew, you'll need to unmute yourself. Thank you.
I've got a bit of a cold, but I'll read you a bit. I wrote on the Dewy Morn, if you like,
Okay.
which chimes in with a few things that Rebecca mentioned. Actually, one thing I will say is the passage on the education of children in the country. Many years ago, I copied out the passage and gave it to the head mistress of Highgate Primary School, and she was completely bowled over by it and stuck it up on the sort of notice board in the assembly hall. Anyway, the novel fulfills the promise of the title. Circular in form, it begins and ends with Felice watching the dawn. In the opening chapter, she goes out a little after 4 of a May morning to watch the sun rise over a hill near her home. In the closing scene, now happily married, she sits by the window and watches the dawn while her husband sleeps. The sunrise thus both heralds the birth and marks fulfillment of Felice's love. That the dawn, like the sea and wheat fields, held a special place in Jefferies' imagination is shown by the frequency with which it occurs in his work, and by the solemn, almost reverent language with which he describes it. It is found in Roundabout a Great Estate, Greenfern Farm, Bevis, The Story of My Heart, and the Dewy Morn. Sorry?
I think that was somebody else, just some noise in the background. Andrew, please carry on. Yeah.
In early agricultural papers, such as The Labourer's Daily Life, and later more mystical pieces, such as The Dawn, it is prominent even in the juvenile Ben Tubbs adventures. Aurora, the name of Felix Aquila's beloved in After London, means dawn in Latin. In The Story of My Heart, it is emblematic of Jefferies' mystical awakening, his entry into what Dr. R.M. Buckey termed cosmic consciousness, of which, however, he thought Jefferies attained only a partial and imperfect state. According to Hindu doctrine, sunrise and sunset are the periods when the world is most full of sattva, purity, light, calm. They are the most divine hours of the day, those most suited to prayer and meditation. Jefferies, who always put his faith in natural medicines, believed the pure air of early morning had a health-giving virtue or property. In Amaryllis at the Fair, he approves the dictum of bluff, gruff, rule of thumb old Butler. If you want to get well, old Dr. Butler used to say, you go for a walk in the morning, afar the air have been breathed over. I can't do a Wiltshire accent. Before the air has been breathed over, inspired and re-inspired by human crowds, while it retains the sweetness of the morning, like water fresh from the spring. That was when it possessed its value, according to bluff, gruff, rule of thumb old Butler. Depend upon it, there is something in his dictum too. R.C. Zehner, an authority on mysticism and Eastern religion, thinks Jefferies may independently have discovered the subtle energy that the Indian yogis call prana, the force that was, quote, more subtle than electricity. Prana means breath, vital force, or simply wind. It is akin to the pneuma of the Greeks, who believed it impregnated mares when they turned their hindquarters to the wind, and to the anima of the Romans. It is the breath of life, the spirit which animates the universe and which breathes in man. Jefferies contrasts ancient and modern attitudes to the dawn. In classical Greece, the women went out at sunrise to pray to the sun god Apollo. No more the hymn is heard to the sun, Jefferies remarks, though the birds still sing it. Their songs vary not, their creed does not change, their prayer goes forth to the same old gods. Similarly, Felice prays, as many a deep-breasted maiden in the days of Apollo and Aphrodite, only her heart was pure and uncontaminated even by any sensuous myth. Like the larks, she prays from the fullness of her heart without being aware that she is praying. The opening of the Dewy Morn recalls that of the story of my heart. In the autobiography, Jefferies, like Feliz, climbs a hill and makes a prayer at the summit. He prays for a fuller life of his soul, that, quote, he might touch to the unutterable existence infinitely higher than deity. The parallel with Feliz's prayer on Ashpen Hill is clear, but there is a difference. In the autobiography, there is no mention of the word love, which in the Dewy Morn is paramount. We suspect this was in part why Jefferies wrote the novel. He realised that something was missing from the autobiography, something he could only say through the persona of a fictional character, and a woman at that. The soul, psyche in Greek, anima in Latin, is traditionally feminine. In the fable told by Apuleius in The Golden Ass, Psyche is represented as a beautiful young woman with whom Cupid falls in love. The story is an allegory of the soul, borne aloft on love's wings in its ascent to the divine. In Restless Human Hearts, Pierce Lestrange always thinks of his daughter Heloise, Feliz's fictional ancestor, as Psyche. Pierce, in his inmost communings, ever thought of her as Psyche, but she was too lively for the conventional conception of Psyche, never still, ever in motion, always eager for change and excitement. Other people remarked this and said slightingly that it was a sign of her French extraction. Feliz personifies love. Love is a function of her intense awareness of her own existence. It is inseparable from her I am feeling. It was love without a lover, love absorbed in itself. Her whole existence was quivering with love. This intensity of life was love. She was gathering from sunlight, azure sky and grassy fields, from dewy hills and all the morning, an immense strength to love. And, quote, what a latent power of love was there in that richness of blood, that depth of chest, that greatness of heart. Pure love, pure as a spring water that comes from the hills, was there ready to be poured forth, always full, always pouring, always the same, and always pure. It is the strength of her love that makes her go out at an early hour, to greet the dawn, because only in the breath of the morning, quote, was there room enough for her heart to breathe. Jefferies emphasizes it was love that sent her to the fields and woods, made her climb the hills and swim in the sea and row. Quote, the soul that inspired the effort was the love that was growing within her. Her soul is overflowing with love. The world is beautiful for Feliz because her heart put a feeling there. She projects her love onto it. Quote, with her soul grew her love, this purest of love and yet strongest of passions. Her young limbs became stronger, her young chest broader, her shoulders and her back finer. A firmer pulse throbbed in her veins. So the soul enlarged as day after day of musing passed, and those long half-conscious reveries which are to the soul as sleep to the frame. She rejoiced in the morning and the sunrise, and felt the glowing beauty of the day. She saw the night and its stars, and knew the grandeur of the earth measured onward roll eastwards, the hexameter of heaven. She saw these things because at her birth love was born with her. The flame was lit with her life and must burn till the end. There are but few men, one only, they say, in many, many years, in whom the fire of genius is clear from youth. These are born, such cannot be educated up from common material. There are but few women, though more in proportion than such men, in whom the divine flame of unutterable love exists from the first moment of consciousness, still growing with their growth. The mark of love was stamped on Felice's forehead. The anticipation of D.H. Lawrence, e.g. the opening pages of The Rainbow, is again clear. A central theme is the way love intensifies the beauty of the natural world, how the two become fused. Felice's love of Marshall, quote, made earth divine. She sees the beauty of the world, quote, with tenfold quickened perceptions, and with that beauty she loved. Jefferies had expressed the same thought in his earlier novels, Restless Human Hearts and World's End, and more recently in The Pageant of Summer. Love is the keynote of the Dewy Morn, the same love that informed the story of my heart, but was not mentioned in that work. That Jefferies was Felice goes almost without saying, yet The Dewy Morn is more than an autobiographical novel, just as Felice is more than her creator. Jefferies expresses his love through her, and in many ways the opening chapters of The Dewy Morn are a more successful representation of the soul trembling with love than the autobiography, because they are closer to the world of myth. Felice is universal love. We have quoted Proust telling Gide, "You can say anything, provided you do not say I." The fictional form gave Jefferies greater liberty to say what was in his heart. That's it, folks.
Thank you, Andrew. I don't know if anyone wants to make a comment about that or what Andrew has said. Any picture? I mean, one thing that occurred to me is, did others at the same time write about beauty in this way? Are there any equivalents to? Because I'm looking at the cover of our autumn newsletter, and when I looked at that cover, I thought, which is a painting that was on the dust jacket and frontispiece of Beauty is Immortal, which was published in 1948. And it's a fairly, what you might almost describe as a fairly racy cover. And I thought, well, that's interesting. But having reread the book, I realised it's a very accurate portrayal of what was written in the book, just about the infamous section on the knees, but also other aspects of when Felice goes swimming. But I was just wondering whether others were writing in such a way during the 1880s. Are there others who wrote about love and beauty as at the forefront of their novels?
Well, I think the the issue is wider than that. Surely the rural ambience is a response, isn't it, to industrialization. The major novelist of this period was Dickens. And it seems as if, I don't know whether Rebecca agrees, but it seems as if a novel like The Dewy Morn leads on or opens a way for, let's say, not going as far as Lawrence, but the early fiction of Hardy. We're looking at a fictional landscape which is antithetical to progress. Are we not? And of course, that does open up to Lawrence and other novelists later. But I think a crucial link is I think with the early novels of Hardy, such as Far from Banning Crowd or Return of the Native.
Colin,
Yeah.
I agree with what you just said, because my first thought was, is this like a late 1800s version of a modern romance novel? It's very different. The other thing too, I've been wondering is that how much of his descriptions had any relationship to his wife? Any comments from anybody?
Quite a lot, I'd say, Lucille.
That's interesting, Andrew, because I have yet to find or read anything that informs me of his relationship with his wife until he was on his deathbed. I don't know if you or Rebecca can steer me on to read more, but anyway, I just had a thought that was this Felice very much his wife, the epitome of his wife.
It's difficult to know how much to ascribe to his autobiographical approach to women, because in a way what we're reading in the story of my heart and in the Dewy Morn is very much a fictionalized ideal. So that was nurtured by seeing the statue in the Louvre in Paris, but it's something he held in his mind for a long time. And in the story of my heart he said it began 17 years ago. So I wonder how far back we can trace this, and does it begin with his wife? It's an interesting question.
Do you have any other further comment, Andrew? Or
well, I think yes. I mean, Felice is an idealized. I think she largely springs out of Jefferies's head. Well, from his soul, actually. A sort of personification of his soul, of his feminine side, his anima side. But certain things, I mean, I wonder, for instance, I'm not sure about the actual chronology. When did he actually go to Paris? Was it before he wrote The Dewy Morn or after?
It was September or October 1883. There's
Right.
a notebook that suggests he was there.
So the statue would have, as you say, it greatly influenced his portrait of Felice. But nonetheless, I mean, things like Jesse feeding Phyllis their children, Jesse's swimming. They must have had an impact. Jessie doing her hair. I mean, the things that a husband watches the wife doing make a terrific impact, even though they're on a sort of semi-conscious level or subconscious, subliminal level. And they sort of reproduce themselves in fiction. And I mean, there's an extraordinary description. He does. In fact, it's not just once, but he says that preparatory to diving, that Felice sort of raises her arms in the air, and this accentuates all the curves in her body. But that again, I think, was something that he may have observed from other women, but one looks at Jessie. A lot of the physical strength of Felice, I would imagine, her came from Jessie. She was a strong woman. But in the main, yes, I mean, she's an ideal creation, and Felice is. But I think some things from Jessie must have gone into her. Um, I mean, certainly, for instance, in After London, I think Aurora's Christian faith derived from Feliz, sorry, from Jesse. Um, Her steadfast, I mean, Jefferies emphasizes the steadfastness of her faith. Um, so he has the, I mean, his women are highly idealized. They have these bizarre names. I mean, Aurora, Amaryllis, Feliz, Eloise. They're all rather exotic, slightly unreal names. And there's something quite, I mean, shadowy about them in terms of, um, sort of down to earth realism. I think in one moment in the Dewy Morn, no, it's in Amaryllis, isn't it? Where she buys some bloaters um, for her mum, for Mrs. Iden, who's very fond of the fish. But he makes a comment that he's not, which seemed to be a reply to the reviewers of the Dewy Morn, who would have sort of accused him of idealizing his heroine. He said, the smell of the bloaters is a sort of realistic, highly realistic element. So he sort of cocks a snook, I got the feeling, at the reviewers by introducing that little vignette.
I wrote down a little cast list in front of me, just of all the sort of characters, and there's obviously, I mean, obviously Felice is the dominant character, but often, from what I read, people say that Jefferies couldn't create characters that weren't really a part of himself. But I think I read somewhere that maybe one of the reviews they felt with Robert Godwin that there was a fairly successful attempt to create somebody that wasn't him. I just wonder if anyone had a comment or a feeling about any of the other particular characters. There's obviously we go from Cornley, the rich person who has the estate, through to Goring, Valise's uncle, who I think probably has some similarities with Jeffrey's father. There's some of what's written in there. Um, and then there's the political side when the way that people, or the rural side, the way that people like Abner Brown, both old Abner Brown and his son were treated as well. But I think there's humour as well, although it wasn't a humorous incident where they're drowning in the mill pond, Marshall and Polly or Mary Shaw, but the reaction of Miller Bond and his assistant seemed to have some sort of humour as they were rather slow to react to anything and went off to get the rope and came back and said we couldn't find any rope without any further action. I just wonder if anyone had any other feelings about some of the other characters in the novel apart from Felice. Or have I said enough? Yeah.
I think he's very good at at capturing the sometimes eccentric rural characters, and he's certainly very good at capturing moments. So if a character doesn't feature too much, or you see them occasionally, then you might get some very good sketches where something's happened and it's a very focused sort of snapshot of what's going on. But when Jefferies has to develop the character over an entire novel, that can be sometimes where he struggles a bit, I think. But he's very, very good at sketching characters and making observations as he might birds and animals and other natural phenomena.
Yeah, Rebecca, on that, I thought there was a very good little sketch in there. The silversmith, who only really gets one sort of scene, but he's drawn. I thought he was drawn quite well. And I don't know if he was based on somebody that Richard Jefferies would have known, but there's mention of the way he walks, the sort of like shuffle and then sort of a hop. So it all does sound like it's not purely imagination, I'm sure. But I think that fits in what you're saying. If he's got a character that's very minor, helps to run the story along, is needed. But I thought was quite well done, to be honest. And it fits in again, I think, with Jefferies mentions lots of different points about society, and he calls the silversmith, I think, a usurer, and he's quite clear that he's not keen on moneylenders, and I think that's mentioned elsewhere in his works, that he thinks. I think after the agricultural workers got the vote, I think he has an article where he talks about I think is it after the county affair or after the county something. He talks quite a lot. That I think that's it. He talks quite a lot in that about the dangers of moneylenders coming in. So I don't know if that sort of like hints at that. And just while I'm talking, the other point that I thought was quite interesting was the little bit about I think it's called the Society for Improvement of Artistic Improvement for the Poor, which I found quite interesting reading, because it's one thing I'd not seen him sort of like talking about before. So I did a little bit of Googling on that, and around about the same time, there was a society called the Curl Society, which was founded by the two sisters that started off the National Trust. And it was a society for improving the poor, not just there in their cottages, but also in more town-based places. So they would do things to improve people's health through eating, and even providing them with things to grow in their garden. And so I think there's quite a bit of social comment about that in this novel as well. So I actually, whilst I acknowledge what most people are talking about, the romantic side and Jefferies being about himself, I found quite interesting the various references to the social situation of the time.
Yes, that's very interesting. Thank you. Did you know what the date was for the formation of that society that you?
I think it was just about. I think it was 1879-ish.
Okay.
So it's Octavia Hill and sister, whose name I can't remember, the less famous one. And I think it's seen as one of their attempts at a forerunner sort of to the National Trust. It was quite interesting to read.
I made some notes for the talk that I didn't actually present because I didn't have space, but I was thinking about the Manchester public art galleries and the formation of them in the 1850s and 60s, and how the idea of making art public as a sort of benefit to well-being and to the overall human condition was quite a popular and well-funded sort of movement at the time.
Yeah, I guess there was quite a lot of that sort of thing going on at the time. But this does seem to fit in with what was being described, when they're looking at the various pictures of saints and things like that, and that's the sort of thing I think that they were doing at the time with these societies, which they started in London, but there were other branches springing out around the country. So I don't know if there'd been one near where Jefferies was at the time.
Yeah,
but there was a lot of people who thought it wasn't a good idea, and that people didn't need art, they needed food, basically, and that there was suggestions that the people would take the pictures and then barter them for food and drink, basically. So it's an interesting social commentary anyway.
It segues into a really interesting passage, actually, because he turns from the insult of this art on the walls of pictures of saints and whatnot, to the actual art in the farm labourer's life, that they have art in their soul, in the way they make their gardens, for instance, their china, their crockery, lots of little ways. He talks about, he's heard about some labourers up north who, after a day ploughing, have enough something in them to fashion a fiddle. Um, um, so that the labourer does have art in his soul, but he doesn't want the salt that's thrust upon him. Um, and there's a wonderful passage in Lawrence, I can't remember exactly where, about a miner or someone looking at his garden with this sort of I don't know, sort of being taken completely out of himself, sort of very still within. So it was there.
Yeah, Andrew, does that also sort of ties in? There's a passage in the Dewy Morn with Abner and his garden, which is obviously made as part of the, he doesn't want to lose his cottage, because one of the main things is he doesn't really want to lose his garden, which is where he feels presumably most comfortable.
Yeah, because he coined this term hand art. He talked in Amaryllis. It talks about books, covers, um, bindings, art in unexpected, not the sort of official art in unexpected places, as it were, or the artistic instinct, put it that way, um, manifests itself in ways we don't usually associate with high art, pictures on walls or novels or whatnot, poetry. But there are other ways the artistic impulse in man and woman shows itself. Um, and he was very keen on stuff, craftsmanship. And some of his best wonderful description, I think, I can't remember whether it's in the Gamekeeper or Gamekeeper at Home or Amateur Poacher, but of just of a gun, the stock and the brass trigger and all the rest of it. And he talks about it. I can't remember. It's a click he makes. He compares it to some sound. I can't remember what exactly, but it's just a magical description. And he creates a work of art out of this gun, instrument of destruction, but just the way he describes it, astonishing. I find him read him now for. I read other people, Henry James and Hardy and whatnot. But I find Jefferies says something that is unique to him, and it's really priceless. And I think Dewy Morn is one of his very best works. I think it's a sort of fictional equivalent of the autobiography, and in many ways is more accessible, more human work. And the political, we haven't really touched on. I mean, the stuff about the um, eviction of the parents from their cottage because the daughter gets illegitimately pregnant, and she then tries to drown herself and dies giving birth to a child. I think, Rebecca, you found an actual real life parallel to that, didn't you?
Yes, there was something in the papers in the 1860s that detailed a drowning at Cote Water, that I sent to you, didn't I, Andrew? It was in the local Swindon paper, the North Wiltshire Herald, I think.
Yeah. And Roger, you were
That we
talking about
think Jefferies may have been.
yeah, early Hardy. What struck me was the parallel between the cliffhanging scene in A Pair of Blue Eyes and the scene in the mill pond.
Yes, yeah.
I found that, I mean, really quite dramatic. And again, that's in extremis. There's a similar scene. I think it's in I can't remember whether it's World's End or Restless Human Hearts. But in extremis, the Marshal realizes his love for Felice, which he's been trying to convince himself that doesn't really love her. Um, and there's a similar, I can't remember which one it was, but someone else is similarly drowning and realizes his love for this woman. It's a very exciting scene, and it's sort of a lot of black humor with the stolidity of the miller saying, "You be drowned." And the sheer wall, and there's the mill wheel, this sort of image of um, ineluctable fate grinding round and round. Very powerful.
Andrew, when you said when you mentioned black humor, I was really taken aback by what happened to Robert Godwin. You know, that he took his own life, and what his how his character was depicted by Jefferies in terms of his anger and his aggression and his controlling manner. It's like, holy moly. And then he takes his own life because he doesn't get what he wants.
But he's extraordinarily lonely. I mean, I do wonder the intensity of emotion, negative emotion in him. I do wonder when Mrs. Leavis talked about the only real novel between Wuthering Heights and Sons and Lovers, whether she had Heathcliff in mind and Godwin as a sort of has this sort of dark intensity, Heathcliffian sort of intensity about him. And he's extraordinarily powerfully drawn. I mean, Jefferies can't really, I don't think he can actually get inside a character and make them live from within, but he's absolutely brilliant at describing them objectively from outside. And his descriptions of Godwin always reminds me of a stamp. I used to collect stamps, and they in Sandy Gibbons' shop in the Strand, they had them mounted on black paper, and so the colour really stood out. But in a strange sort of way, Jefferies sort of counterpoints Godwin's complete blindness, oblivious to the beauties of nature, with these descriptions of what he's missing. And somehow the fact that Godwin doesn't appreciate heightens these the beauties of the night or whatever. And he's extremely powerfully drawn. I thought the actual suicide, the attempt of stamping out the beauty from the, I mean, that seemed to be a perverted form of rape to me. I thought it was wildly over the top. And when he rushes into Goring's house, I thought that was over the top too. But the general portrayal of him preceding all that, and his sort of very ambivalent, I mean, he tortures himself by inviting Felice and Marshall to sit in his garden, and he sort of watches them, and he's quite aware of their feeling that Felice loves Marshall, not him. And the incredible erotic charge when her arm brushes his, and he can feel her breath, you know, and the scene again erotic on the downs between Marshall and Felice, with the horse acting as a sort of objective correlative to the unspoken sexual passion. It's very powerful, strong stuff.
Anyone else wants to make a comment? I was going back to what Colin was saying.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Rebecca.
Oh no, go ahead. I can wait with mine. It's just a little comment I have.
Yeah, I mean, just going back to what Colin said, I was just looking at the quote where it says, for the enjoyment of art, it is first of all necessary to have a full belly. Jefferies writes, and is not art rather in the man than on the wall? And then he goes on to describe about their gardens outside, trees in the garden, plums, pears, damsons, trees planted by the owner for fruit and shade, but mostly for solace, since it is a pleasant thing to see a tree grow. These people, having no fear of being turned out of doors, had accumulated such treasures, a chair at a time, making the interior homelike. And out of doors they had planted trees. Without love of trees, I doubt if there be any art. Of art itself, in itself, they had had no thought. No one had ever tried to draw or paint. They had coloured their strips of flower garden or bordering with bright yellow flowers. That was all the paint they knew. I thought that was a very evocative description of their art and their gardens. Yeah.
And it's still true. I mean,
You had your comment, Rebecca?
Oh, it was just on the character of Robert Godwin, because I was just agreeing with what Andrew said, and I had a little quotation I jotted down, which is almost verging on satirical, of when Jefferies describes Robert Godwin, and he writes, "It is questionable whether he had ever grasped even the idea of a gas, as it is invisible. That which he could see and touch was all that Godwin knew." It's quite a strikingly satirical example of Jefferies' humour at times as well. It's quite subtle, but it's there.
Right. Can't see any hands or anything unless anyone wants to. I don't know whether there's any sort of summary you want to make, Rebecca, or.
I'm grateful for everyone's contributions. It made it very interesting and enjoyable. I just think with the closing remark that it strikes me how much Jefferies was actually trying to do in this novel, because he's trying to fit so much in, and it was very much a kind of bridging work between his earlier works and his later thought. But it's amazing it came out the way it did when he was trying to fit so much in. So I think he did a very good job, considering he was stretching himself to cover so much. That's my final thought.
Right. I think you said in your introduction it was a very productive period, wasn't it? Over this time, there was over these years, the early part of the 1880s, he was producing a lot of works, essays, books. He was very, very productive before his illness sort of took over again. Yeah.
Yes, and the writing of The Story of My Heart was such a breakthrough for him that his work was never the same again after that. So there's a sort of pre-Story of My Heart collection of works, and then there's a post-Story of My Heart. I'd say it's a kind of I think Bill Keith said it was the Story of My Heart was the central work around which all other Jefferies works revolved.
Thanks for mentioning Bill Keith. Brings back lots of good memories for me. Rebecca, would you mind sharing your little introductory PowerPoint?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. That was great.
Yes. Would you like me to send it on email or something?
Sure, whatever is the best.
Okay. Any final thoughts from anybody?
Just a question. That this was the first of Jefferies' actual novels that I read, and I just wondered, especially from what Rebecca was just saying, that earlier stuff perhaps wasn't so good as his later stuff. Just wondered if anyone had any recommendations of, is there an order that you should read his novels in, or just try any particular one?
From a personal perspective, I would read Green Fern Farm, and I'd read Amaryllis at the Fair. Similarities to
So they're the later ones, presumably, are they?
Well, Green Fern Farm was 1880, 1881, I think. And Amaryllis was later. That was the last novel he wrote. Yeah.
Okay.
Others may have different views.
Well, After London is quite dystopian. If you want something really different, After London is, and The Story of My Heart. I mean, holy moly.
Okay, thank you for that.
You're welcome, Colin.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody for their time and their comments this evening. Been very enjoyable as usual. Next month, Monday, the 5th of January, our next talk is by Patrick Dillon, who's our vice chair, and the title is Richard Jefferies and Environmental Spirituality. And there's a little, if you look in the autumn newsletter in the inside of the front cover, there's a little write-up about that Patrick provided about a little précis of what his talk's going to be about. So hopefully you can join us then in about 5 weeks' time. So until then, thanks again. Hope you have all, seems a bit early, but let's just say hope you have all a good Christmas and a happy new year, because it'll be 2026 before we meet again.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Nice to
everyone.
see you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Colin. Thank
Cheers.
you.
Bye.